What happened to you when you were young that you didn't understand until years later? When I was about 10, my friend told me I needed to go into the hot tub and put my wiener up against the jet because it would feel really good. We had no idea what was going on and ended up concluding that we had invented the feeling, deeming it having a spermutation. Wasn't until years later that I realized I was just whacking it with the help of a high Reynolds number. Female here. One of my most embarrassing moments, though not at the time, was doing this when I was in my neighbor's pool with a bunch of people around. My mom saw and yelled at me to stop, so naturally I responded, but it feels good in front of all these people I had grown up with. Thanks for reminding me of this horrifying moment. When I was little, I'd go see my grandparents and my grandpa would be in the basement building something or fixing something, and I'd go down to see what was up. I'd say, "Grandpa, what are you doing?" and he'd look at me and say, "I'm building layovers to catch meddlers." It was years before I figured out that was a roundabout way of saying none of your business. My grandpa would just say, "Baking a cake," if you asked him what he was doing. He was never baking a cake. Carjacked with my cousin. I was 12. She was 16. Gun pointed at my head and everything. At the court hearing, they were caught. My lawyer person lady asked if I was aware that the 4 men who carjacked my cousin and I had intention to kidnap us, as the police found duct tape and rope in their getaway car and they fessed up to it. That was a heavy bomb dropped on me while I was testifying against them, but I never really understood how lucky I was until I was older. My mom used to always go through periods where she would mostly hide in her room, yelling like she was in agony, and other times she seemed totally fine, like a few days on, a few days off. I always assumed she was depressed, as I have depression too. Turns out when my brothers and I went to her hometown for her funeral recently, I learned she was a drug addict. I had absolutely no idea. I'm sorry for your loss. I'm assuming she was trying to cut off drugs and withdrawal symptoms were overwhelming. My younger brother and I were playing in the bathroom. We used to make potions mixing different soaps together and stuff. Usual weird kid stuff. One of the soaps we found was a bit different. It smelled like strawberry candy, and when dared to, my brother tasted it, said it was delicious. We figured we had hit the kid jackpot. Edible soap. We cheerily shared almost the whole bottle before my mom walked in and took it away from us, kinda laughing but trying to remain stern while doing so. Fast forward a few years to my first visit to the stag shop, and I realize my brother and I had eaten almost a whole bottle of strawberry flavored personal lubricant. I was about 5-6 years old in a Calder store, defunct discount Sears wannabe store in New England. My mom and I were on the second floor, and I was a couple of steps behind her. I thought I saw her go down the escalator, so I did too to catch up. I couldn't find her. I looked around for a while fruitlessly. I was eventually approached by a lady who looked to be about 40 in a brown leather jacket. She asked if I was lost. She said she was a police officer and that my mom was outside. She led me toward the front entrance, as my mom called for me from the second floor. I went to my mom. Unless I remembered some details incorrectly, I think I was about to get kidnapped. This fact occurred to me when I was about 20. I just thought how nobody in this thread actually got kidnapped. Then I realized it would be irrelevant to the question and they probably wouldn't be able to tell anyone. My parents' divorce. My mother suffers from bipolar disorder, and 20+ years ago the psychiatric community was fragmented in terms of how to properly medicate it. Without proper medication and good access to mental health, my mother was not only suicidal and constantly depressed, but she had a bad spending habit. During her bouts of mania, she would go on shopping sprees to the tune of $10,000 to $20,000. Buying all kinds of useless crap we didn't need and couldn't afford. She'd put it all on credit cards. There were quite a few times growing up that I recall my dad loading bags and bags of crap into his pickup truck and carting my brother and me to the mall and standing in line for hours returning the stuff. When my dad finally had enough, he committed my mother and then filed for divorce. She'd threatened to kill herself if he ever left her. For many years I had a great deal of animosity towards my dad, because I thought he had abandoned mom when she needed him the most. He did everything in his power to try and help her. Not that she didn't want the help, but nobody he took her to could get her on the right medication. I was well into my 20s before realizing he made the decision he thought was best for me and my brother, though. He made a lot of mistakes on his own, too. I guess I came to the understanding that my dad didn't want to take the chance that my mother's illness would cause irreparable damage to us. My father had a drinking problem and severe depression, and because I was 5'6" at the time, I didn't realize what was going on. My father died when I was 6 and I never knew why. I didn't understand death and it confused me to see everyone so upset. Mum told me that dad got really sad and died of alcohol poisoning. I took this as truth until I was 12 years old, and I googled my father to find photos of him only to find news articles about how my father had committed suicide. It really only hit me then that dad had died, and I broke down because I finally realized that what mum meant was that dad had drunk a lot and couldn't handle his depression anymore. Only now do I realize that dad drank to escape his depression. TLDR. Didn't understand depression, death or drinking as a child. Now I do. I miss you, Dad. My dad died for the same reason. Our dad still loved us. It was just too much to go on. Didn't really happen to me, but when I was 14 I suddenly realized that those 2 giraffes at the zoo when I was 7 that I shouted about to everyone else weren't giving each other piggybacks. Oh crap, that made me smile. That's great. Found my mother's dildo. Thought it was some weird device to out on my thumb to make me stop sucking it. Also found one of her vibrators that I thought was lipstick. I was always snooping around my mother's crap. Also the fact that my grandfather was high on H a lot. I always remembered times he would lock himself in the room while me and my sister would watch TV or play in the living room, and like 30 minutes later he would come out eyes all wide. He finally told me what he was up to a few years ago. Might have been a mix of H and Coke. For the wide eyes. Reminds me of Little Miss Sunshine. My mom had this woman who stalked her when I was really little. I always just thought of her as the mean lady, but it wasn't until I was older that my parents explained to me just how crazy she was. She would show up to places we went and would watch us, call my parents all time, leave threatening letters, etc. Part of the reason why we moved from Mexico to the US was because my parents were afraid for my safety. Part of the reason why we moved from Mexico to the US was because my parents were afraid for my safety. Spoiler alert, you may not have run far enough. Dad used to have a shop in the basement where he would work on things in the evening. He used to smoke while he was down there, and I wasn't allowed to be in the shop because smoke is bad for kids. I used to sneak down covert style sometimes and he'd catch me and shoo me out, all while laughing and smiling. The smoke smelled different than regular smoke, but I was little and didn't think much of it. Years later, when I first, knowingly, smelled pot, I instantly recognized the smell. Dad used to smoke pot in the basement every night. This really reminds me of something too. It wasn't someone we knew, I think, just a stranger on the street. But one day I asked one of my parents what weird kind of cigarette that person was smoking, and they said it was a herbal cigarette. It was several years later, well after I'd been taught about weed, that I suddenly put 2 and 2 together. I was about 4 and my cousin, like a sister though, had just gotten married. I was very close to her since she used to babysit me all the time. When the couple visited us for the first time for a weekend, I wanted to sleep with them in their bed. Of course I wasn't allowed and nobody would tell me why. Now I understand why. The bastard was banging my sister. I enjoyed steamed beans, particularly the ones that had a little juice in them when you pop it out of the shell. So I said I like them young and wet, and my family had a laugh over that. I just figured out what it means a decade later. 22 BTW. My parents took me to some kart race track because racing is awesome. The white kart was in front, so I yelled white power. People got mad and we had to leave. I guess they wanted the red car to win. When I was 6 years old, one of my friends in kindergarten wanted to suck my dong, a boy my age. Now that I look back at it, it seems kind of weird. And now you're into girls' a-holes. You're a Freudian mystery. A friend and I would sometimes hang out at the cemetery when we were younger. Not for any morbid reasons or anything. Mainly just because it was a quiet place we could both easily reach. And it was remote enough to be a good place to smoke pot. One day when we were out there we saw my dad on the other side of it. He wasn't doing anything really, and after he left we went over to check the grave near where he was to see if that had anything to do with it. There weren't any new graves, and the ones that were there were way too old to be anyone he knew, so we just wrote it off. As I got older I realized what was going on. He was probably getting high there too. Exhale of relief, even I didn't realize it till the last sentence. When I was little my family and I would go up to Pennsylvania during the summer. We had a trailer in this resort place that only allowed mobile homes. I remember one night waking up scared shitless because the trailer was rocking. I knocked on my parents' bedroom door. They said it was okay, that sometimes the raccoons like to shake the trailer. That satisfied my young mind. Not until later on that I thought of it and realized that it was my parents getting it on. I was at a friend's house when I was about 10 years old. We were laughing and giggling about something. I don't remember what. I laughed so hard I peed in my pants. I was so embarrassed. I just wanted to change my pants and forget about it. She wanted to tell her mom. I begged her not to. She did anyway. I was mortified just sitting on her bedroom floor. Her mom came to the door and said, "It's okay, sweetie. I peed my pants at a job interview today." I believed her and it made me feel better to think that a grown-up had gone through the same thing. A few years later it dawned on me that she only said what she did to make me feel less embarrassed. She was a stay-at-home mom. She didn't pee at a job interview. I had reoccurring dreams of crying in the tub while someone threw water in my face from a very young age. I told my mom about it in my teenage years and she told me that I had been raped by my babysitter's older son while being given a bath when I was 2. Sad story, but I feel pretty disconnected from that whole experience. It just feels like a bad dream. I was raped when I was 5, and unless I try to focus on the details, which I try to avoid at all cost, it feels like a bad dream to me too. Thank God for fuzzy kid memories. When I was young, I lost a tooth in an Italian hoagie, or sub, grinder, big sandwich depending where you are from, and ended up swallowing my tooth. I told my parents about it, frantic that I wouldn't get my $1 reward from the tooth fairy. My dad told me that I should draw a picture of my tooth and maybe the tooth fairy would let that suffice. So I drew the tooth, and I woke up to a drawing of a $1 bill. I was confused, angry, laughing in frustration, and I didn't understand at the time is that my dad is awesome. I was given a note to take home from my private kindergarten. The note informed my family that I was no longer welcomed at the school and for me never to return there. I was then enrolled in a public school kindergarten. It wasn't until several years later that I found out that I was kicked out of that kindergarten because my father was arrested by the FBI and sent to an internment camp shortly after World War II started because he was a leader in Hawaii's Japanese community in his service as a volunteer liaison between the family's Buddhist temple and new immigrants from Japan to Hawaii. I found out about this when my father finally returned to the family a year after the end of the war, when my mother told him about all that transpired in his absence. Edit. That last sentence was wishful thinking on my part, as my mother was very ill and died before my father returned from internment. What she did do was maintained and documented each of her offspring's day-to-day activities, keeping all of our school paperwork, our report cards, our health reports, everything and anything she could do to compile our life's existence during our dad's absence. My dad went through all this stuff late at night when he thought that we were all in bed asleep. I would get up at times and watch him without his seeing me and would get so sad to see him wipe tears from his eyes from time to time. I developed a sense of outrage that our government would bring so much hurt to my family. Obviously, didn't realize what my parents were doing the one time I walked in on them having sex. I thought they were just like roughhousing and I was annoyed because they got mad at me for doing it. I found my grandmother's douche in her bathroom and I thought it was a tub toy, was using it to squirt water. And lastly, someone tried to abduct me and I was just like, why is this stranger calling my name, asking me to get into his car? I don't know, but he doesn't know the code phrase my mom gave him, so I should stay here. Maybe this is a test, not a test. I was in first grade, and my mom was late to pick me up from school. So as I'm sitting in the front office waiting, there is this weird older lady sitting across the room from me, maybe mid to late 40s, and she's smiling at me, playfully trying to get my attention. I was a super shy kid, just didn't really say anything and looked away. The secretary for the office sees us exchange and the weird lady chuckles and says, Oh, he's so shy, as if she knows me. A couple minutes more of this awkwardness. Then the weird lady stands up, grabs her purse, walks over and grabs my hand, and says, "We'll just have to come back another time, sweetie," and starts walking me out of the office. At this point I'm still confused. I haven't even said a word to this woman, but my 6-7-year-old self didn't necessarily feel enough panic to speak up. The office secretary knows something is up. Maybe she even knew who my mom was. Just as the weird lady is leading me out the door, secretary says that I was student of the week and I need to get my picture taken. I remember how tight of a grip the weird lady had on my hand, and how angry she looked when the secretary quickly pulled me away. I was led into a back hallway where I saw the secretary whisper something to my principal. I still remember the look on his face too. I now recognize that look as a mixture of anger, but relief. Anyway, woman had escaped from a low security mental facility and was off her meds. Drove to the most remote elementary school she could find in the Phoenix area to escape into the desert with me apparently. I didn't have an understanding of that day's events until years later. TLDR. Almost kidnapped from my school by a mental woman when I was 6. That office secretary was a clever lady. I don't think I could have come up with a clever way to determine if the weird lady knew you remove you from her grip. Way to go, office secretary. When I was about 4 or 5, we were having a barbecue at our house in the summer. Towards the end of the night I was thirsty, so I wandered around while the adults were busy and found a glass nearly filled to the brim with a clear liquid. Without thinking, I grabbed the glass and quickly chugged half of it. I think you see where this is going. Honestly, who drinks a full glass of straight vodka or tequila and then forgets it on a table? The burning sensation of the definitely not water freaked me the heck out. I ran inside and stuck my face underneath the sink faucet until I could breathe again. All the adults were pretty busy outside and there was still music going, so I just remember dragging myself to the sofa and knocking out. Drenched in water, I found myself in my bed the next morning, but I suppose waking up in your bed after a rough night of drinking is only acceptable when you're a kid. TLDR. Had my first hangover at 4 or 5 years old. I know of a 4-year-old who found the pot brownies one morning while everyone else was asleep. Teenage me and the parents sat around anxiously watching this child eat donuts and giggle at cartoons until it wore off. I've posted it before, but I'll repost because it's still one of the most well-rounded stories of my lifetime. My family always went on Sunday drives, and we'd all bum around whatever stores we passed along the way. Every once in a while, we'd pull up to this weird store. They referred to it as the daddy store. My mom would sit out in the car with my sister and I while we bounced off the walls inquiring as to why we couldn't go in and what daddy was getting. I even tried to escape the car and make a break for it once because I was so goddamn curious as to what my dad was doing. They refused to ever go into detail about it, and we were never allowed to look inside of the opaque black bag my dad would come out with. Fast forward 15 years to when I found the giant cardboard box in the back of my parents' closet. Suddenly, memories of trips to the daddy store flooded my mind. They were buying freaking pee. My parents had an entire box filled with 80s pee. I never mentioned it until I got a job at a pee shop in college. My parents tried to express their distaste for my choice in employment, up until I asked them what was so wrong about working for the daddy store. Not me, but my dad. His father, my grandpa, used to take him to summer camp when he was younger, between like 7-14 years old. My father grew up in a very poor Mexican home, so he wasn't quite sure what summer camp was. He didn't realize till later in life that summer camp does not consist of working in the fields all day picking fruit. I didn't understand why my older brother oddly giggled when he'd hear the word BJ in a movie. I thought it was some kind of bank robbery thing. You can see my confusion. Fast forward 2 years off. I had older cousins that would do the same but then convince the younger kids that a dildo was a type of candy. So us younger kids would go up to our parents asking if we could have some dildos. Good times. I have always been curious, and I loved to watch TV when I was little. One night my parents and I, 7 years, were watching TV and the commercial break showed a Durex ad with the slogan "Have safe sex." Use a condom. I asked my mom what they meant with condom, but my mom tried to dodge the question, stating she didn't know, an answer I did not accept, so I kept nagging and asking how she could not know when they were talking about it on TV. My mom got up, reaches for a dictionary volume concerned which letter starting with C, flips through its pages, mumbles various words starting with co, shuts it and says that's strange, it's not even in this very elaborate dictionary. That, I accepted. I was about 12 and at dinner with my parents, brother, cousin and his wife. I stopped all the adults talking to show them how I could fit a cocaine in my mouth, which 10-year-old me thought was pretty impressive. My cousin said she'll be popular with the boys when she gets older. I was about 12, 10-year-old me. When I was in 6th grade, my theater speech class was assigned to lip sync a song of our choice. I chose Hot for Teacher by Van Halen, having no idea what the song meant. My teacher was a middle-aged Jewish dude. I was a dumb kid. When I was 9, my family went camping from the end of May to the beginning of September. My brother and I had a blast the entire time. It wasn't until 24 years later that I found out we were homeless for that time. I was being melodramatic about cleaning out the drain after washing the dishes. BC, there was something slimy in there. My dad said to me, son, that's far from the mushiest place you're going to have your hands in during your lifetime. Turned 16. Got a GF. Made sense. Thanks, Dad. Dad always knows just the right way to explain sex. My birthday is towards the end of the month, and one year they told me all my presents got stolen from the back of my dad's car, but that we would get money from the insurance, and when it came through we could go shopping and I could choose all new presents. It only struck me 15 plus years later that they were actually broke and waiting for my dad's pay to come through so they could buy me stuff. When I was younger, can't remember how old, a buddy and I were walking around my neighborhood, and I don't remember how the conversation started, but we ended up talking to this older man as he was checking his mail or doing yard work. He asked if we wanted to see something cool. We said sure, and in his garage he had an amazing model train set. Like, awesome. Model towns, tunnels, multiple trains. It wasn't until years later when I was talking to someone about train sets I realized how stupid that was of my friend and I. Now, I'm not saying this guy is Kid Diddler. Maybe just a lonely old man with a dope butt train collection. Maybe just a lonely old man with a dope butt train collection. Truly a chilling epiphany. When I was a kid, maybe around 8 or 9, I knew kinda pieced it together that strippers were people who took their clothes off, but then in my little brain I knew that there was a thing adults did after they took their clothes off. I just had no idea what. Then one day my dad was watching television and someone on some show said that the woman they were talking about was a H. I had no clue what a H was, so I asked my mother and she explained that a H was someone who sold their body. I didn't ask any more questions because my mom seemed pretty uncomfortable, but this confused the ever-loving crap out of me because my little child brain couldn't figure out how the hooks fit into the picture. Like maybe they used the hooks to remove their body parts to sell them. Did they use tiny fishing hooks? Did they use big meat hooks? Was there another type of hook that I was unfamiliar with? How was the payment set up? Was it by body part or by weight? I had no clue. This went on for a bit, then a little while later, I must have just been starting middle school. I was walking around the mall with my friends and I saw an amputee for like the first time ever, and I turned to my friends and I was like, hey guys, check out that H over there, and they all got mad at me and said I was such an butthole. I figured it just wasn't polite to point out who is and who is not a H in public. It wasn't until like high school that the distinction became clear to me, which sucked because I had called a lot of amputees H by that point. TL. DR. Please explain the difference between strippers, H, and amputees to your kids. For years my father sang the song My Only Sunshine to me, and for years I thought he wrote it for me. It wasn't until I was about 18 and watching an older black and white film where they're singing that song that I realized that he didn't write it for me. I was so confused and so sad for a while. I was called into my school office when I was like 6 or 7. My mother was there and the school nurse asked me to get my dong out. When I first remembered it I thought I was abused, but assuming my mum was there, it was probably her being concerned that a ball had traveled back up inside my stomach or something. I hope. Anyway. Yay. My guess is that she saw something the last time she saw you naked, changing, in bath, etc. and wanted a school nurse to take a look at it just in case. I'm betting the school nurse is cheaper to ask an opinion of rather than taking you to a doctor. You might not have had insurance at the time. From 5 years old, I lived with my parents and one of my sisters on the streets of Harlem. My parents were addicts and we bounced around homeless shelters a lot. I befriended a black girl at one of these shelters, with what I thought was snake-like skin. We became the closest of friends until I was taken away from my parents, and I never saw her again. The image of her face lives with me to this day, and it wasn't until I was about 12 that I realized that the girl didn't have snake skin. She was covered from head to toe in burns. The bullying at elementary school. I couldn't wrap my young brain around it at the time. Why are these shitheads so mean to me every day? I realize now that either they just didn't know any better and didn't realize the weight of their actions, or their lives at home were fricked. When I was 8 or so, I was at Camelot Park, like a mini amusement park, with my family. I was finally tall enough to ride the go-karts, so my mom let me go by myself. Once I was finished, some random man grabbed my shoulder and told me my mom had to take my brother to the hospital and that he was going to take me to meet them, and she said it was okay. I was a stupid kid apparently because I was totally down to go. I mean, he knew I had a little brother, so he must know my mom. I told him I had to run inside the food court area to grab some fries. I had one earlier, and when I went in I saw my mom and brother sitting at a table. I remember being so confused, and I remember telling my mom what happened and she completely freaked out and we left. We didn't really talk about it for a few years, but I realize now I was incredibly close to being kidnapped, if not for some stupid toy I had one earlier. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.